So I referenced the histogram, and the histogram, I'm going to give it a little bit more time to explain in just this separate tutorial. When you are making adjustments in the light adjustment area in the basics, whether it's Photoshop or Lightroom, I'm using Photoshop for this example, but the same rules apply. You don't usually see a histogram in a cell phone, so you're seeing it, you're just not seeing it in bar graph form. And I chose this photo because it is going to work really well to kind of simplify the explanation. One thing to point out is that you have a lot of these adjustments here. And when you're moving these adjustments, you are moving the histogram and you're moving the bar at the same time. You're just doing it directly from the histogram versus doing it with the sliders. So you have those tools there. But it still doesn't really get to the point of like what the histogram is. And the best way for me to start to explain it is to use the term value. And value doesn't mean cost. What it means is a range of colors from dark to bright. And in this case, you're seeing 3 different color values, which is what makes it difficult to interpret what's happening here. It's basically a bar graph. So on this end, on the left end, you've got all the dark values, and that's why it says blacks. And then you're moving up and up until you get to the highlights and the whites. So the brightest pixels will be here. And then the higher up the bar at that particular point, the more of them are in the shot. Now I'm going to switch this to black and white to make it a little bit more clear. So now there's only one single histogram, and that's going to make it easier for us to interpret this image, this bar graph. What you're seeing here is you're seeing a lot, not that many black colors or dark colors, and that makes sense when I look at the photo. Probably most of those pixels are right around here in the dark tree. And you've got a lot of grays right here, and that makes sense because there's sky and then a lighter gray. And then you've got a lot of brighter colors, and that's going to be your whites, your snow. The sky is probably going to be more in this curve. And then that bar drops off to the right because there aren't that many super highly exposed parts of this image. Now I'm going to take the exposure, basically shifts the entire curve to the right, as if and you'll see basically you're seeing visually in the image what's happening on the bar graph is if I'm shifting everything to the right, more of those pixels are overexposed and bright white. And that's what's happening when you're increasing the exposure is you're shifting the histogram to the right. When you shift the histogram to the left, you're doing the opposite. You're taking everything and making it darker than it was when it was originally exposed. This can be done in post, or it can be done in photography. When you have a digital camera, a lot of times the digital camera is doing a good job trying to keep most of these pixels in the middle, making it a properly exposed shot. But in the old days when people were using film, if they didn't do it correctly, they let too much light in or had the wrong type of film for the lighting conditions or didn't measure light, their shots would be ruined. They'd be overexposed or underexposed. So they'd have to learn and measure light in order to get this correct. So in the digital era, there's less for you to think about, and you're thinking more about composition. So what do you do with it? That's great. What do you do with it? Well, you do the same edits that we were talking about. And again, when you apply color, it's doing the same thing, but it's just working with pixels and different color properties. I want to turn black and white off. Red, yellow, green, where the overlap is, blue, cyan. So I'm going to go back to black and white and just use this visualization as well as the image to play with it. And what I'm looking at is to create, starting with, I'm going to do some contrast adjustments first. No, I'm going to do exposure. I do want a little bit brighter white. And for that, I might want to try a white balance adjustment and see if that gives me some of the shift that I'm looking for. And that was just this dropper tool. But still, I want to go a little bit higher. And then I want to increase the contrast because I want the darks to get darker and the brights to get brighter. And you'll see I'm kind of exaggerating the effect. In the histogram, the pixels on the darker end shift left while the pixels on the lighter end shift right. That's what contrast is doing, is it's splitting those apart. These two peaks are moving further and further apart. And in the image, you're seeing brighter brights and darker darks. I can accentuate that by shifting continually the blacks, and I'm getting more of a true black. There's that spike right there where some of these dark images just turned to black. And same thing for the whites. I can keep extending that split, basically spreading the histogram out as much as I can. Again, with the shadows, shifting even more. So I'm almost creating kind of a overly stylistic contrast, and it's not looking realistic, but I'm just showing this to you so you can see the relationship between the histogram and the image. But the key takeaway here is what that histogram is showing you, and how another way of visualizing how some of these edits are affecting the image. Now, again, I could do the same thing with color, but I'm just trying to make the point as simple as possible, that the histogram is a measurement of how many pixels are on a value scale from bright to dark. When you're making adjustments, you're either adjusting the entire histogram. I don't think contrast is on here. Contrast is separate because it's splitting it. Or you're adjusting the darker ends of the histogram, or the darkest ends of the histogram, or highlights approaching the brighter grays. I'm going to dim that down, and then the whites. And within that, you could spend a lot of time editing to get a style that you like. Now, in this particular case with this photo, what I was focused on, I don't know how much closer I can get. Let's see if I can get a little closer to show. What I was focused on is that contrast between the sticks and the ice. And yes, all of that is what it looks like when you get a little over an inch of freezing rain on a landscape. And while this was captured, I think, with a cell phone, I think the depth of field's a little bit lower. You can kind of see the dark shadow of the twigs, and then the light is catching on these ice crystals. So when I'm making my adjustments, I'm trying to find a way where I can see the sticks in contrast to the ice itself. So to keep some of that texture, not completely blur it out, I'm bringing that down just enough. Anyway, I hope this helps you understand what the histogram is. When you do start to wrap your head around it, it's just another way to understand the editing process, but also the photography process that you're diving into by taking this course. Thank you.